Hey everyone, I'm Stephanie.
And I'm Sandy.
And this is the Italian American Stories podcast. Okay, well, today's story, it actually comes to us from an Instagram follower. His name is Chris Massari, and he posted on Instagram one day where kind of talking about how he started diving into some of his family's history, and he posted some really interesting articles on his Instagram account, and I commented on it, and basically one thing led to another, and here we are telling his family story on our podcast.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Thank you, Chris, for helping me out with some research and giving us the opportunity to tell your family story.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so let's dive in. So this story, it mainly revolves around his great aunt, Augustina Massari, and her tragic murder. However, this story also greatly involves his grandfather, Mario. Honestly, I would also say that this incident truly impacted his family for generations. And so, like always, we'll start with her family history. Augustina's father, Eduardo Massari, he was born on August 25th, 1883 in Umbria, Italy. And he came to America somewhere between 1901 and 1904. It's sometimes so hard to pin down those dates.
Right. Yeah.
He settled in New York City for a while and married Felicia Veneri on December 2nd, 1912 in Manhattan. And Felicia, she was born in Italy on January 1st, 1890, and she came to America on December 1st, 1912. And I thought this was really interesting because according to her marriage records, her and Eduardo, they were married on December 2nd, 1912. So she was in America for one day before she was married.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, it must have been prearranged.
That's what I was thinking too. It's probably planned out. But talk about a busy couple of days.
Yeah, that had to have been fast, unless they just went to the courthouse.
That's true. It's like, welcome to America. Here's your wedding ring. Right. Now you're married. And maybe they knew each other back in Italy and maybe families knew each other. So just a different time back then for sure.
Right.
But somewhere between 1912 and 1915, the couple moved to Pennsylvania where they started their family. And they had 4 children. Their first child was Augustino Massari, and he was born in 1917, but sadly he passed away at the age of 3 from diphtheria. Diphtheria. Thank you, Mom. And so that's according to Google, is a bacterial infection that can affect the throat, nose, skin, and tonsils. And it gives fever, swollen neck glands, makes them really weak. It was the leading cause of death for children in the early 1900s. And their second child was Augustina, and that's Chris's great aunt. And she was born on December 2nd, 1920. And that was actually the same year that Augustino died, which maybe Augustina, that might have been, maybe they
named after.
Yeah. And so, but Augustina was also born on her parents' 8th wedding anniversary. So that's kind of cool because remember, they were married on December 2nd. So,
wow.
And after Augustina, Joseph Peter Massari was born in 1924. And the youngest was Mario Edward Massari, and he was born on November 16th, 1926. And Mario is Chris's grandfather. And so during this time, Eduardo, he worked for the railroad, and Felicia was a homemaker. So sadly, in February of 1928, Eduardo, which is Augustina's father, he was working on the Ben Franklin Bridge. And according to the family, they believe that he had a heart attack. And it sounds like he might have got bronchitis and pneumonia and then passed away. But on his death certificate, it does say that he passed away due to heart disease. So 44, that's pretty young.
Yeah, it is.
Especially with heart disease. And
right.
Yeah. And then a wife and 3 kids.
Right.
So, yeah.
That's sad.
Yeah.
And they're young.
They're young, yeah. Working out in the cold and on the railroad on that bridge and stuff too. That was probably could be really hard on you. And so in 1930, Felicia, she was living in Philadelphia with her 3 kids, and she was working as a coat baster. I've never heard of this before. I had to look it up. Did you ever?
No, I knew it had something to do with sewing.
Sure, like a tailor kind of thing. Yeah,
know.
I didn't either. So in the 1930s, this is according to Google, a coat baster was a skilled worker in the garment industry who specialized in basting coats during the tailoring process. And so basting is a temporary sewing method used to assemble pieces of fabric with loose, easily removable stitches. And it also allows tailors to then adjust the fit and structure of a garment before permanently stitching it. So when I hear the word basters, and it's probably because of the holidays, I think of basting the turkey. And so when I first saw that, I thought did they put a oil or some sort of a
On the
treatment on the
coats.
coat. Yeah, and so in the 1930s, coat basters, they often worked in sweatshops or small tailoring businesses, especially in large cities where, they had huge garment hubs and stuff. But Felicia, she was actually working from home. So that's kind of cool, especially considering she was a single mom at this point. She was a widow and she had 3 kids.
Right. That's kind of amazing at that time. And then how did they get all the material back and forth to her?
I know exactly. My guess is she probably had to go get it.
Yeah.
She'd probably, I'm completely speculating here, but you can almost imagine her and like her 3 kids in tow, all carrying baskets of garments and then
that's true.
carrying it back. So, but that's kind of nice that she got to do that at home,
right.
especially with the 3 kids. So, but now we're going to fast forward to July 18th, 1937. And this is the day that Augustina was sadly murdered in her home. So she was 16 at the time. And like I said, she was at her home in Philadelphia with her little brother, Mario, and her mother, Felicia. So Felicia and Augustina, they were preparing dinner, and Mario, he had fallen asleep on the table. So, he had his arms folded and his head resting on his arms. Like you can almost picture that, like just kind of sleeping. And so from Chris's understanding, Mario was sleeping because he was working a job to help support the family and he was tired. He sold newspapers.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
And so this was later at night. This was around 8:30 at night.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, he was probably wiped out and
ready for bed.
Yeah. So while Felicia and Augustina were cooking, 40-year-old Caesar Delavelle it's spelled a bunch of different ways depending on the newspapers. He walked into the home and he asked Felicia to go grab some of his important papers. So Felicia and Caesar were acquaintances, I guess you could say, and Felicia was holding some papers for him. But what Caesar's true intention was to get Felicia to leave the room because he truly wanted to confront Augustina. And so Felicia leaves the room to go get the papers, and this left Augustina and Mario alone in the kitchen. So while Felicia is gone looking for these papers, Caesar walked up to Augustina and he shot Augustina twice or 4 times. It just depends, different reporting.
Grief.
Yeah, shoots her right in the chest.
And she's 16?
She's 16 years old and he's 40. So Augustina, she immediately fell to the ground, and this obviously woke up Mario, who was at the table sleeping. It's all this commotion and stuff. And Mario, for only being 10 years old, he took quick action. He grabbed a butcher knife from the kitchen counter and went after Caesar. And he was actually able to grab a hold of Caesar's coat sleeve and, try to hold on to him. But Caesar shook him off and took off running.
Wow, that's pretty brave for a 10-year-old.
For a 10-year-old. And, kids can sleep. He might have been like out cold on that table and woke up and probably can't even imagine what he saw. Like, that's so heartbreaking.
So sad.
It's horrible. And so neighbors, they heard the shooting and they came running over to the apartment. And when they got there, they tried to stop Caesar from leaving, but he was able to get away and, run out of the apartment building. But little Mario, he was still in pursuit, and he actually chased Caesar into the street, but eventually lost sight of him. So, he was not giving up. And so another neighbor, Ernest Caruso, he came into the apartment and took Augustina to St. Agnes Hospital. Sadly, though, the doctors were not able to save her, and they said that she most likely died instantly from the gunshot wounds. So,
I'm sure he's shot her so close range and that many times.
And right in the chest, yeah. Okay, so let's talk about who Caesar was and how he knew the family. So Caesar, he was currently working as a produce vendor and was a former CCC camp worker. And so that is the Civilian Conservation Corps, and that was a voluntary government work relief program that ran from 1933 to 1942 in the United States. And this was mainly for unemployed, unmarried men ages 18 to 25, but they eventually expanded it to ages 17 through 28. And so this was a major part of President Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal, and it basically supplied manual labor jobs related to conservation and development of natural resources.
Right.
So
I've always heard of that.
Have you? And so in fact, the papers that Caesar had sent Felicia to retrieve right before he killed Augustina were his CCC release papers. So a few articles that I read describe the relationship between Felicia and Caesar as friendly and made it seem like Caesar spent a lot of time at the Massari home. And apparently he had kind of been around for the last 10 years since Edward had passed. Now, Chris, he thinks that Felicia might have been renting out a room to Caesar, to just kind of bring in extra income and that kind of stuff. Right. And that was why he was around.
Makes sense.
And Chris is right, because a lot of articles, they actually describe Felicia as being a landlord or something around those.
Oh, okay. Well, that makes sense.
Yeah. And so some of the articles that I read, they described that the three kids, Augustina, Joseph, and Mario, they didn't like Caesar spending time at the house. And they really didn't like how Caesar, over the years, had tried to be the authority figure at the house. Kind of step into that father figure role.
Right.
Especially if you're just renting a room, like not your business.
Right.
You
don't know what kind of a person he was.
Exactly.
For all the kids not to like him.
Exactly. Yeah. And I get that, it's just this guy renting a room and he's trying to be the father figure. It's like, yeah, that's not going to work. However, Felicia, she eventually did kick him out of the house because he slapped Augustina for talking back to him. So,
wow.
Yeah, I think that was it. She's like, you got to go. But Caesar was not happy about this. And when he left the house, he told the family that there would be crepe on their door for this. And that is a type of fabric that people would hang on a door to announce.
A death.
Death. Yeah.
So he told him right there that he was going to murder somebody.
He threatened him right there. That's pretty scary.
Right.
So when the police came, Mario and Felicia, they both told the police that they think he shot her because she snubbed him at church. So apparently Caesar approached Augustina at church that previous Sunday and asked how her mother was. And I guess Augustina, she just kind of quickly turned away from him, refusing to speak with him, and this infuriated Caesar. But the day of the murder, the police, they led a massive search for Caesar, and one paper actually called it a dragnet spread, and all I can think of is the Dragnet TV show. And so the police, they also made a statement that Caesar had a criminal background. Apparently he was arrested in 1929 on a charge of assault and battery with intent to kill. So
wow,
this is not good. But after a 12-hour search, the police, they found and arrested Caesar. He had been hiding in an empty freight station, and when he felt like it was safe, he left the station and went to his room at a rooming house to get a change of clothes so he could leave town. But as he was leaving the rooming house, a police officer spotted him and arrested him. And I guess when the police officer arrested him, Caesar apparently started yelling, "It's true, I killed her."
Wow.
So the police, they took Caesar to the station to be interviewed. And during the interview, he did admit to killing Augustina out of jealousy. He said that he was actually courting Felicia, but during that time, he fell in love with Augustina, who was probably a very young girl. She was 16 when she died.
Yeah, that's...
Ugh, so creepy.
Wow.
And so, but he said Augustina wanted nothing to do with him. He told the police that he spent a lot of time with the family and tried to offer the children fatherly advice, but the kids always resented this. He even said that he scolded Augustina for, quote, running around with the boys. He said, quote, "It made me mad. I'm sorry Augustina is dead, but she shouldn't have made me jealous." Ridiculous.
Wow. Yeah.
You're a 40-year-old man. She is a 16-year-old girl.
Yeah, that's sad.
And so courting her, it has, and even Chris pointed this out, has a stalker feel. You're not courting her, you're stalking her. It's creepy, especially with the age difference. And so Caesar told the police that he lived at the Massari home for 6 years until Felicia had recently kicked him out, like we talked about earlier, for slapping Augustina. And he told the police that Felicia told him, "You can't live here anymore." And he said he didn't understand why, because he always paid rent. Maybe because you slapped her, and I'm sure Felicia was maybe seeing some inappropriate things going on probably with him toward Augustina, and so she was probably like, "You gotta go,"
right?
And so Caesar said he did move out, but when he moved out, he also went and got a gun. He also told the police about the situation at church. He said, how he went to talk to Augustina and she just basically turned away from him and wouldn't speak to him. And so he said that when they left the church, though, he approached Augustina and told her, "You better give up those boyfriends. I am coming over this evening to kill you all."
Wow.
And he did intend to kill the whole family. He told the police that he wanted to kill all of them. But he also mentioned in his interview that he knew he would only get 5 years for this. And so after this confession, the police said that Caesar basically just fell into a troubled sleep in the interrogation room. But the police, they didn't let him sleep long because they needed the murder weapon. And so the police, they took Caesar out so that he could show them the sewer that he threw the revolver into. This gets a little crazy here, this next part. So this outing, it created quite the stir in the community because everybody had heard that he had been arrested for it. People were not happy about it. And so when the neighbors of the Massari family saw Caesar with the police out on the street, they became angry.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's like, we want revenge. And one paper reported that about 200 people crowded around and threatened to kill Caesar.
Wow.
Yeah, they started yelling, "Lynch him." And there were only 2 police officers with Caesar. And so they both had to draw their pistols to keep the crowd back. And one of the officers was actually hit with a piece of brick. The other police officer was struck in the face by someone in the crowd. And the 2 officers, they were able to take refuge in a garage with Caesar and hold off the crowd for a while. But the crowd, they were yelling things like, "Lynch him" and "give him to us" and "kill the dog." I mean, they wanted revenge.
Well, can't blame them.
Killed a 16-year-old innocent girl.
All right.
Eventually, 2 other officers showed up with a car and took Caesar back to the station. And as the car was driving off, the crowds, they were beating on the windows of the police car. And during all of this, Caesar actually had the nerve to ask the police officers, quote, "Why do they want to hurt me?"
Wow.
It's one of those moments where you don't know what to say.
Right. Well, you were just saying he's all over the place. His mind is.
It's like, do you not see your fault in this? And so apparently he kept saying things like, quote, "I'm sorry I killed her. It was because I loved her and she made me so jealous of other men." You mean boys? Because she was 16.
Right.
Anyways, so the police, they had to hurry Caesar back to the police station, but eventually they just moved him to a different precinct altogether. I think they were nervous about the crowds.
Right.
So, and once he was in this precinct, he collapsed and started yelling, "My God, I love that girl. I didn't mean to shoot her. Please bring her back." And so on July 20th, 1937, Caesar was charged with murder and held without bail. And Augustina's funeral, it was actually held the following Thursday on July 22nd, 1937. And the funeral consisted of 2,000 people. And it actually stopped traffic during the procession because it was so large. And it was led by a 10-piece band. The service was at St. Rita's Church. And the police, they actually helped clear the streets and the crowd as her body was carried into the church. And Augustina's casket, it was carried into the church by 6 girls wearing white robes. I saw where they carried the casket, but then another article I saw where they walked next to the casket. So kind of reported differently in different articles, but I don't want to say beautiful, but it's...
Yeah, that was nice.
Yeah, kind of a...
Whether they carried it or
not, just probably friends of hers or knew her or something. So
being 16.
I know, so young. And she was buried at Holy Cross Cemetery. So about a week later, the coroner's inquest was held on July 28th. And Felicia, Joseph, and Mario were present at the inquest. And while they were waiting in the courthouse, they spotted Caesar. And Felicia, she just couldn't take it anymore.
I was just going to say, uh-oh.
This is not yep. And so she lunged toward him, yelling at him in Italian and pointing her finger at him. And the police, they had to restrain her. But then Mario lunged toward him, attempting to strike Caesar. But the police were able to restrain him as well. And I guess Mario was shouting, "I wish I could kill you."
Wow, he's a strong young man.
He is, yep. And you got to feel for him, like he saw the whole incident happen, and sure, he lived with that. Well, we know he lived with that the rest of his life, and just wanted that justice, I guess you could say. So, but after this, Felicia collapsed and she actually fainted in the waiting room. And there is a picture of her resting in a chair with a doctor leaning over her, and her 2 sons are standing around her. And so we'll post that to social media because it's a pretty powerful picture. It just shows the grief and the trauma that the family is going through at that point.
Yeah, so sad.
And so there's not a lot of information about the trial, and I'm not even sure when it started, but I did find one interesting thing that happened. Apparently, at some point during the trial, Caesar claimed that he only shot Augustina because she came after him with scissors. But the prosecutors, they quickly pointed out that 1 or more shots hit Augustina in the back. So I guess Caesar...
Again, he's all over the place.
He's all over the place. It's like, oh, I killed her because of jealousy. No, I killed her because she was coming after me. And it's like, no, you entered their home. And so on February 26, 1938, Caesar was sentenced to die in the electric chair for the murder of Augustina. And his execution date was April 19th, 1938. His attorneys, of course, appealed for the death sentence to be turned over to life in prison. And this appeal caused the death date to be extended to June 6, 1938. But on May 27th, 1938, the governor of Pennsylvania, he actually granted Caesar a stay of execution until July 11th because his appeal was delayed. So
wow, this just keeps getting put off.
I know, it just keeps getting pushed off too. So on June 27th, 1928, Caesar had another hearing to overturn the death sentence. And his attorney said that it was a crime of passion and a threat from Augustina to cut him with scissors. The prosecuting attorney said that it was a cold-blooded, malicious murder and the death penalty needed to be upheld. So, the defense attorneys are basically just trying to throw whatever to see what sticks. And the prosecuting attorneys are like, no, he killed her. This needs to stick.
And has admitted it.
Yeah. And so the pardon board, they actually agreed to review the case on July 2nd. So Caesar, he was granted another stay. However, when the board reviewed the case, they denied his appeal and the execution date remained for July 12th. His attorneys at this point said that his only hope would now be a pardon from the governor. And this is exactly what happened. No, I know. Now, it wasn't a full pardon, but the governor gave a stay of execution until October 3rd because he wanted the case reviewed for further investigation, I guess. But on September 22nd, 1938, Caesar had his hearing, and his attorney claimed that the only reason Caesar entered a guilty plea was because he thought the death penalty was off the table. His attorneys described the murder again as a crime of passion and described Caesar as, quote, a highly excitable, temperamental Italian in an inflamed mind when he fired 3 or 4 shots from a revolver into Augustina. There's so much about that sentence, but 3 or 4 shots, how do you not know
by now?
What a mess. And so the following day, September 23rd, 1937, the pardon board forever overturned Caesar's death penalty, and he was now sentenced to just life in prison. So death penalty is off the table.
Well, at least he'll be in prison all his life.
Yeah, well, we'll see about that. But during this, I can't help but think, what an emotional roller coaster for the family.
Right.
I mean, you're just oh, he gets another week. He gets another 2 weeks, another month. So from what I could find, Caesar, he was in prison until around February 19th, 1958, when he got out on parole or was pardoned by the governor. So you're talking 20 years?
21, yeah.
I'm not sure what happened to Caesar after this or what the reasoning was for pardoning him.
Right.
I couldn't find anything.
What changed life in prison?
Exactly. And Chris had sent a few documents that he found, prison archive records, but I couldn't really find anything. Now, on Ancestry, though, I did find, and I'm not sure if this is the correct Caesar, but I did find a Caesar with the same last name that passed away in 1959. So the only thing that I could think of was maybe he was sick and dying, and this is why the governor pardoned him. They knew he only had less than a year to live, and so the governor was like, okay, just go. But again, I don't know. I don't know if that's the same Caesar or not. So,
okay. Yeah.
It's just me kind of putting some puzzle pieces together, whether or not they fit. But so one interesting fact that Chris was able to pass on to me, though, was that the police, they were concerned that Mario would go after Caesar once he was released. Mario's older at this point.
Makes sense.
They even called Mario to make sure that he wasn't going to do anything. And Mario's daughter later on, she said that she believed the reason Mario did not go after Caesar was because at this point he had a family of his own.
Yeah.
You're older. It's what are you going to do?
Right.
But as for Mario, though, Chris's grandfather, he went on to serve in the Army Air Corps during World War II and then joined the National Guard where he was a cook. After the military, he went on to work in the restaurant industry in some fashion throughout his whole life, whether it was a cook, a manager, owner. And Mario married Angelina Fortuna in 1948, and they went on to have 3 children. And Angelina and Mario, they were married for 50 years when he passed away. So they had a long, happy marriage.
Yeah.
And Mario, he passed away at the age of 72 on February 19th, 1999. He passed away from lung cancer. He was a smoker, like so many of that generation.
Right.
Now, Mario and his brother Joseph, they had a turbulent relationship. And Chris, he wasn't sure kind of when the relationship started breaking apart. But after Augustina died, that causes a lot of drama and turmoil in a family. I think that something transpired after the murder. Some sort of a conflict started as a direct result of this. So their relationship kind of struggled from there. Talking with Chris, he told me that Mario, he never really discussed the Augustina's murder. So much, in fact, that his kids, They didn't even know Augustina's name.
Oh, well, I can understand that.
Yeah.
Why bring up, well, plus people are just like that. You don't tell stories.
Yeah, exactly.
Our family.
Those secret, I know. Actually, it was funny because when Chris and I were messaging back and forth on Instagram, I think I had said something like, oh, those family secrets, we've all got those. But, not that this is even a secret. It's probably really hard for Mario to discuss, I did speak with Chris and asked him to share a few stories and memories about his grandfather, so I thought we would end on that. Like we said earlier, Mario worked in restaurants as a restaurant manager, and while living in Virginia for a while, he had some interesting experiences. Mario worked at Grant's, and this is kind of like a Kmart, Sears, Woolworth, and the majority of his staff, so I think he was a manager at the store. The majority of his staff were African Americans, and the KKK was pretty prominent in that area, and they would watch the Grants and refer to Mario as the I-Italian. So like EYE Italian, so like I-Italian. But Mario, he got along and was really beloved by his staff. He would sit and eat with the staff and have conversations. They would drive with each other to and from work. And he didn't really care what others thought. Even when his staff would tell him that he really shouldn't be doing these things with them, and he would respond with something like, nah, I can do what I want. Now, that's not an exact quote, but that's just kind of what, Chris remembers the family story is.
Well, good for him.
And so Chris's dad, he remembers one specific story where a man in Virginia told Mario in so many words, basically, that you should just leave town. And Mario basically told him to go fly off a cliff, like something of that nature. But Chris said that, his grandfather, while he was really strong in his beliefs and stood his ground, was also a very sweet man, but he wouldn't shy away from conflict. So, yeah. But Chris said that they all remember Mario as being just a big loving bear, and all of the family, all the kids, they truly adored him. So
that's nice.
Yeah. And one really cool story was Chris said that his grandfather would always call him Gabadost. And I emailed Chris and I was like, I want to make sure I pronounce that right. And he sent me a video. And so according to the video that I watched, it means like hard-headed or stubborn. He also said that Mario tried to teach him the language. And he remembers Sunday visits to Mario's house were all about food and Frank Sinatra. And he also enjoyed crabbing and fishing and said that this was a great bonding time for them.
Oh, that's nice.
That's really cool. In fact, this was one of the last things that Chris and his brother did with Mario before he died. Oh. So that's cool that they got to do that bonding with him. Chris said that his dad tells him that his son, so Chris's son, reminds him of the stories that he heard about Mario as a child. Oh. So I bet that's pretty neat for Chris's dad to see Mario. Right. And then Chris to see Mario. Like you just get to see that throughout those generations. Mario, he also liked to work with wood and build things. He built a few things for Chris. He made him a truck, a dog, and a wooden toy bin. And Chris has now handed those down to his children.
Oh, that's good that he kept them.
Yeah,
they stayed. Sometimes those things disappear.
That's true. Get broke, those kind of things. So that's really cool. And Mario, he was also a proud member of the Beechwood Italian American Club for many years. He enjoyed cooking Italian food and was really remembered by all for his cooking. And Chris said that the murder, it deeply affected him and his family, and he's now realizing the true impact it had on all of the generations later on. He said that Mario endured many sleepless nights, had illnesses that now would probably be contributed to stress and PTSD from the event. And Chris also, he talked about Felicia a little bit, which was Mario's mother, so Chris's great grandmother. She did not speak English, and like a lot of immigrants at that time, she struggled in a new country, especially being a widow with young kids. And Chris's father, he grew up with Felicia, and he remembers one incident when their dog was hit by a car. And Felicia was so upset about this that she more or less basically threw herself over the dead dog and was just wailing and crying. Like you can imagine losing 2 children and a husband and then the dog to be hit. You know, dogs can be such a big part of your life.
Well, that's what I was just going to say. Another family member.
Another family member, yeah. But one of the most beautiful things Chris told me was that Mario was his window into his Italian heritage. He said that this is how he became proud of his Italian ethnicity. And I can completely relate to this. That's how I feel about my grandfather, who I call Papa, and Mario, Chris called Mario Papa too. So
that's sweet.
Yeah, I can completely relate to that. And I think that's something that you really hold dear to your heart, you know?
Right.
Because it's how you become proud of an Italian ethnicity. So, but yeah, I thought that was one of the most beautiful things that he said. But that is the story of Augustina Massari. And I guess more than that, just the story of the Massari family.
Right.
So, and Chris, we just really want to thank you for giving us the opportunity to tell this story on our podcast. It was a true honor. And
yes, thank you, Chris.
yeah, it was a very important story to tell. And again, thank you so much. Well, we hope you enjoyed listening to the story of Augustina Massari, and we hope you come back to listen to more stories about Italian Americans. See you next time.
See you next time.